You want a review? Here's a review. This book is awesome. Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master by Mike Shea, aka Sly Flourish, is more useful to DMs than the actual Dungeon Master's Guide, and no, this is not a sponsored video. I just really believe the message and style of this book align with the message and style of this channel to simplify your game and make it more fun. If you're already hooked, you can order it through the affiliate links below, but we're ready to jump in. So here it is, Sly Flourish's Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master by Michael Shea. I really love this cover art of a very dramatized dungeon master there behind the table. Obviously we have kind of a terrain piece set up, our actual bases on these little characters here. So it's just a really epic looking display of what D&D is. And on the back we have our real mission statement of this book. Prepare what benefits your game. And we'll see in a minute how that continues with omit what does not. But it also lists here how this book is a follow-up of Mike Shea's original book, The Lazy Dungeon Master, which is also the name of his blog. But as we dive in, you're going to see how it says, right here, you don't need to have read The Lazy Dungeon Master before reading this book. I've never read that one, so as much as this is sort of a sequel to his first book, it does kind of encompass and revitalize all of the ideas of that first book with new data, even backing up how some of these tips are used by so many people. And to begin at the beginning, Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master is a book designed to help game masters of any type of any tabletop role-playing game, both veterans and newcomers alike, get the most value out of their time we spend preparing for our games. And that's really the case. Like it says here, it's all about just getting more out of your prep time. And that's something that I really believe in now because I spent so long over preparing for my games as a natural world builder and really liking that part of it and slowly learning. That's not why most of my players come to the table. They come to do epic things as their character, and this book touches on those points throughout. But some real proof of concept in this book right at the beginning is this section, how to read this book. And even what you're seeing here with bolded lines throughout it. He really narrows down the best things you need to do, even in terms of reading this and consuming this as something you're learning from. With this little paragraph right here, he says, Chapter 2 explores Lazy Dungeon Master's checklist. That walks you through the main steps of the Lazy Dungeon Master preparation. If you read nothing else, read Chapter 2 to gain an understanding of these main steps. And it actually continues there. The end of each chapter includes a checklist covering the main points of the chapter. And this works great for me as a reviewer here too, because we're going to focus on some of those bullet points to really sum up what this book has to offer and why I think you should buy this instead of the 5e Dungeon Master's Guide. And so last thing before we really crack into it, it says here that being a game master isn't about following the rules in this book or in any book necessarily. It's about using this to slowly define your style of DMing. You making it your own personal craft. And I love that. Moving on. Table of contents again breaks down our 8 steps that I listed in my video about the scatterplot method of DMing, which I based some points off of this book. But out of our 100 pages, which is a really quick read, mind you, about half of it is about preparing for your game, portion here on actually running it, and then thinking about your game, which aligns a lot with preparing, but talks about tips that didn't quite make it into his top 8 for actually preparing the game. Though I think some of these could easily be in your top few tips that you are going to focus on the most, because again, it all comes down to personal style. The first chapter, beginning with some awesome artwork, really just goes over, again, kind of the mission statement of this book, how it's all about learning and about developing your craft as a DM to really try to narrow down what your players want to get the most out of their game and what you want to have the most fun playing the game. And chapter 2, like he said, summarizes the main message of this book. So here are our 8 points for being a lazy dungeon master, or really I would just call it an efficient dungeon master. That is to review the characters, create a strong start, outline potential scenes, develop secrets and clues, develop fantastic locations, outline important NPCs, choose relevant monsters, and select magic item rewards. And then it goes on to summarize each of those 8 points just in this chapter. But as we'll see in a second, all of these chapters are actually pretty short because it's meant to be read quickly. For example, review the characters. This is step number 1. These 2 pages, which is really about 1 page of text, is the entire chapter. And it begins with this great quote from Chris Perkins saying how nothing's more important to the campaign than the stories of the player characters. And this is kind of a modern perspective of D&D. It used to be about dungeon delving, all about the treasure and coming out of that dungeon, hopefully fighting a few monsters along the way and living to tell the tale. Now, it's really about the stories and getting deeper and deeper into the personalities of characters. So as much as I come from this perspective of wanting to world build and create a fantastic living world, I really am always constantly needing to remind myself that it's really about the characters. So for all of my sessions of Icewind Dale, I write down the names of my characters. That way, anytime, anything else I come up with during that preparation is going to be based on them and what they want and what's going to connect to their story. So I really think this first one is one of the key principles of this entire book. Just review the characters at the beginning of your prep. That will make all of your prep more relevant to your entire group of players every time. Creating a strong start is important, especially for the beginning of a campaign, but I don't necessarily believe this is one of my core principles. It's important to think about, what's happening, what's the point of this session, and how can you draw them into action. But I kind of don't like this recommendation of when in doubt, start with combat. I feel like that's something that could get a little too tedious and it would quickly lose its luster as your players are expecting to roll initiative at the beginning of every session. It's definitely something fun to do and something I've done, but don't do it all the time. I would say no more than like 25% of your sessions. But in any case, it is a good idea to have a goal for the session of what you want your group to actually accomplish. Outlining potential scenes is one of my other most important tips that I took from this book because I use it to kind of wrap up a few of these other steps, which we'll get to in a minute. But the checklist here really does sum it up perfectly. Write down a short list of scenes that might occur in your game. So I look at this as NPCs they might meet, locations they could go to, whether that's a store or a dungeon, or a monster they might run into during their travel. Then remember that the goal of writing down scenes is to help you feel prepared. It's not necessarily to say, this is what we are doing in the session. It's just to help you set some ideas on the table of these are the things that can happen during the session. And it follows that up with scenes can occur in or out of sequence. So you don't want to be planning, this is happening, and then this is happening, and then this is happening. And it goes on to say how don't fall in love with your scenes, be prepared to throw them away. Because ultimately, you're at the mercy of your players' whims. And that's kind of a theme throughout this whole book here and why we don't want to be over prepping, which is again, something we all kind of have a sense of or learned the hard way at some point, but these tips really narrow down how you can do it. So defining secrets and clues is my other favorite because exactly as this line states it here, the abstract nature of secrets and clues sits perfectly between preparation and improvisation. To me, this point is so crucial for setting yourself up for success during a session without overdoing it. In bold up here, you don't want to know how the characters might find them. Improvise the discovery of a secret or clue while you run your game. You're just creating these plot points that exist for your players to discover, and not knowing how they'll come about makes it just as exciting for you as it does for the players when they find these secrets. And something I like and dislike about this checklist is the idea of throwing away secrets that aren't revealed during a session. I like it because it's going to keep you fresh when you're trying to come up with new ideas every time, but I also dislike the idea of getting rid of that prep that we spent time working on. So I would probably, and I do, hang on to a few secrets every time. Developing fantastic locations. This one, I really just love this tip. Start with an evocative name. That's a great way to just start riffing on something, whether you're doing it in a session, even if you just wrote down these names and you don't know what it is until your session begins, you can create some great ideas just based on these. And this paragraph here, what makes a location fantastic? It says these great points of size alone often does it. If you just make something huge and massive beyond scale of what the players and obviously what their characters might be used to, it's gonna seem so epic and awesome. Same works for age. If you make something super ancient, thousands of years old, that makes it fantastic right off the bat. And it gives a couple examples here that you could actually use. And so this is also something that mining a book like this or even a published adventure works really well for, because those locations are already going to be created for you. But if you're a world builder like me, you don't want to be hanging on to all of these locations and don't feel too tied to them, because your players just might not be that interested in the ones that you really wanted them to check out. Outlining NPCs, this is totally a topic that just deserves its own video, and he does kind of go more in depth for this one and brings it up again later on. But the main idea here, his real takeaway, is just basing NPCs off of characters from popular fiction. So just putting a little twist on characters that your players might even know about to totally just reskin them and redesign them. And choosing relevant monsters, I love the inclusion of the word relevant here, because it reminds us that no encounter should be totally random. You want to use monsters and challenges that are important to what's actually going on and what the characters and the players really see as important. Don't just throw things in their way for the sake of throwing something in their way. That would actually be a lazy DM tactic rather than an efficient one. And as it says over here, really preparing your boss fights is crucial, because you want those moments to be memorable. So you're gonna want to come up with some cool custom abilities that your more experienced players will be totally wowed by. And finally, selecting rewards, because we want our players to look forward to things besides leveling up. So it could be adding in magic items that you've just asked them about. What items would you like your characters to have? Some of your more experienced players might have something in mind, and even your newer players might customize their own item that you could put into the game. And we're already on chapter 11 here in the book, and this again just kind of goes over what we've just been talking about, really. But then we get to reducing the checklist, which I really like, because it's reinforcing this idea that we are going to make our own DMing style out of this book. He recommends creating a strong start, defining secrets and clues, and developing fantastic locations. Again, I really think this is great for a very episodic style, or even running a one-shot. But I think for an everyday session as part of a longer campaign, you don't necessarily need that super strong start every time. My characters are often waking up from a rest when we begin. So if I wanted to start every session with combat, as was recommended here, every time they're waking up, it would quickly become a joke, I feel like. So my things are reviewing the characters, then defining secrets and clues, and outlining our scenes, which for me involves fantastic locations, NPCs, monsters, etc. But that's not all, folks. We get into these other high-value preparation activities. Creating handouts. Whether you're playing in person or online, creating some handouts, some letters a player might find, or in this case, you could say artwork of a symbol that's etched into a wall, having actual images for them to see, or giving them a real tangible item that, hey, this is what your character is actually looking at, is a great way to take your campaign and your session from a game to really more of an experience. The thing about all these is that they can take a lot of time. Preparing handouts, even finding artwork can be a little time consuming, and definitely creating maps can. However, check out my video, I'll link it up here in the description, about Dungeon Scrawl, which is a super easy web-based application for creating your own maps really quickly. Finding music is also great for setting the mood during a session, and then we get into other tools a DM can actually use and really benefit from. So in this case, having a single notebook where you're going to keep everything. A lot of DMs do this online. My notes are all in a Google Doc. A single sheet of paper that describes your whole campaign. This I've never tried, but I want to, because I feel like it would keep you really focused on the whole campaign and overarching goals that you have in mind for the story. A curated random name list. This is kind of number one. You really want to have names just available at any time, because that is the first and often the only thing you need when coming up with an NPC on the fly. So initiative cards, cheat sheets of any kind, flip mats. There's a lot of other tools here that I don't use. Like, I often don't use miniatures or terrain. I'm more of a theater of mind DM, and that's a preference, and he talks about that later on too, how grids and theater of mind both have their benefits. But first we jump into this section about reskinning, because truthfully, you don't ever have to create anything on your own. There are so many free resources available online, and great ones that you can purchase, and even just taking a monster from the monster manual, using its stat block, but totally just saying it's this other creature that you made up, your players will most of the time never notice that. So you can completely reskin, monsters, dungeon, a whole world. Anything is yours to be taken and tweaked into your own world. This, building a lazy campaign, is another one of these super important lessons that I wish I knew early on, because it's something that would have probably saved me many hours of time and would have allowed me to work on more skills that are more important to my actual game. But developing a spiral campaign is what he calls this technique of starting your focus, or focusing your attention on where the characters are now, and then building out what they want to do next. And that's it. You don't have to create anything beyond that scope, because they don't even know it exists. There are some more important world building tips here, like the actual campaign hook. What is the driving action of the whole story of this world? 6 truths of your world. That's an interesting point, something I haven't tried to create for myself, but definitely something I want to do when I get into more world building on this channel. And he has this really short section about session zeros, which I would say hits the main points of what I cover in my ultimate session zero checklist. But I want to jump to, traits of good GMs: relax, listen. Honestly, this one, guys, just ask your players what they want. It's really just about hearing what your players are saying to each other. What are their ideas about what's happening next that you can actually weave into the story? Trusting your tools and sharpening your skills. So, of course, you're here watching this video about this great book about being a better DM. So you're already doing that. And if you're subscribed to this channel, you're making a lot more progress. He gives a tip here that I feel like doesn't deserve its own whole little chapter, but summarizing the previous session. So having your players describe what happened last time. It is a great way to gauge what they found is important, but often I find that whether it's been a week or a month since our last session, unless you have a player who really takes great notes and then honestly looks at them between the sessions, you are going to be the one who has to summarize what happened last time. However, I guess this is a good practice for getting your players to really be thinking about it more, so they'll be ready for that moment next time. Tips for group storytelling, like, just really calling on the players to describe more things in the world. So again, these are really just driving questions that you can use. This extra section on improvising NPCs, and I really want to get to what I found to be the most important part of the book, but you're seeing here, we have more about combat, some tips for maintaining the pace of a session. Okay, here it is. So this is one of the final chapters of the book that I really feel like should have been right at the front, maybe even on the back of the book, maybe even in the actual Dungeon Master's Guide, but here we go. Everyone's here to have fun. It's just a game. So you don't have to take all this so seriously, even though, you're buying a book to learn how to do this better. That's a crazy level of dedication that you have there, but everyone's just trying to have fun. And probably my favorite here, players don't care as much as you think. This applies to anything where we're putting ourselves out there and we're so worried about how we're going to perform. But honestly, at the end of the day, people just don't care. And it ties right back into that first one. And in this case, they're just there to have fun. But a little caveat to that is players do want to see their characters do awesome things, and they love breaking the game. So that was the main point of a recent video of mine about how in Critical Role they often mess up the rules, but ultimately it's something that leads to them having a ton of fun in the game. So again, it's just all about having a good time, and that's what this book really wants you to be able to do by limiting your prep to what is going to give you and your players the most joy at the table. And that's kind of what this whole channel is about. So if you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe to get weekly videos about more awesome resources like this and other tips for running a game or just being a better player. Again, there are affiliate links to this book down in the description and a pinned comment. But another great way to support the channel is by joining Patreon like Tensi, Mike, Michael, Adam, Shiraguma, Diego, Morgan, Zimmy, and Jordan all did this past week. So thank you all for your support, and keep building.